When the glass eyes fixate on you, remember, not everything made of porcelain is empty inside. Leah had always loved antiques, so when she stumbled upon a hidden shop on a cobblestone street during a trip to the countryside, she couldn't resist going inside. The shop was dusty, filled with all sorts of relics, but what caught her eye was a porcelain doll. It sat in a dark corner, its glass eyes almost gleaming, the angelic face somehow unsettling. The doll was old, its lace dress yellowed with age, and its blonde, curly hair looked almost human to the touch. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with pale skin and sunken eyes, hesitated when she pointed to the doll. He said it had belonged to several little girls, and they all seemed to abandon it quickly, as if something wasn't right. Leah, however, wasn't deterred. "She's beautiful," she said with a smile, leaving the shop with the doll in hand, unaware of the concerned glances from the shopkeeper. Leah brought the doll home and placed it on a shelf in her bedroom. That night, everything seemed normal until a faint clinking sound broke the silence. Leah woke from a restless sleep and saw the doll had fallen to the floor, its head tilted in such a way that it seemed to be staring directly at her. She put the doll back on the shelf, convinced it had simply slipped. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Leah started to notice that the doll changed positions, even though no one else had access to her room. Sometimes, it seemed closer to the bed. Other times, it was back in its original spot. At night, Leah felt a presence in the room, as if someone was watching her. Additionally, Leah began to have horrific nightmares. She dreamt of a little girl in a white dress running through dark hallways, always pursued by a grotesque shadow. The girl cried, screaming for help, but the shadow would catch her every time, strangling her until the last breath left her body. Leah would always wake up just as the girl let out her final gasp, with the unsettling feeling that someone was standing next to her bed, watching her sleep. Worried, Leah decided to investigate the doll's origins. She returned to the antique shop, but when she arrived, she found only an abandoned building, with no trace of the man who had sold her the doll. Puzzled, she searched online and, after days of digging, found a forum discussing haunted dolls. One of the posts mentioned a doll very similar to hers, which had once belonged to a girl named Evelyn, who had died under mysterious circumstances in the 1920s. According to records, Evelyn had received the doll for her 7th birthday. After a few months, the girl began exhibiting strange behavior, talking to herself, claiming to hear voices at night, and eventually harming herself. Her family, believing she was possessed, locked her in the basement out of desperation. Not long after, Evelyn was found dead, with the doll in her arms. Leah was terrified, but still reluctant to get rid of the doll. She decided to store it in the attic, thinking that the distance would stop the strange events. That night, Leah woke up in the middle of the night. The clinking sound was louder, and the whole house seemed to tremble with an ominous presence. She knew she had to go to the attic. Climbing the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath her, Leah opened the attic door, and there was the doll, sitting in the middle of the floor, as if it had been waiting for her. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room's temperature dropped. Leah saw something move beside her. It was the little girl from her nightmares, Evelyn. But something was wrong. Evelyn didn't look like a victim. She was smiling. "You found me," Evelyn whispered, her voice a hiss that echoed through the attic. "You brought her back to me?" Leah froze, her body paralyzed by fear. Then, the doll began to move, slowly lifting its head to meet her gaze. "We are one," Evelyn said, her voice now coming from the doll. "She brought me back, and now, you will be next." Leah tried to run, but something cold wrapped around her ankles. It wasn't Evelyn, and it wasn't the doll. It felt as though the floor itself had come alive, rooting her in place. The air grew thick, and an invisible force began to press down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Amid the chaos, an old mirror in the attic caught her eye. Reflected in it was something that made her gasp. The doll in the mirror wasn't the doll. It was Leah. She was trapped inside, and the reflection smiled back at her with glass eyes and a pale porcelain face. The truth hit her like a crushing weight. Leah wasn't herself anymore. From the moment she brought the doll home, something had been switched. Evelyn wasn't the victim. She was the predator, and the doll was her anchor to the real world. Leah had been absorbed into the doll, her soul now trapped in that ancient porcelain body, while Evelyn inhabited her flesh. Evelyn, now fully in control of Leah's body, gave one last smile to the reflection in the mirror before leaving the attic, closing the door behind her. The doll, with Leah's terrified eyes, remained behind, sitting in the dark, unable to escape. Megan had never been particularly close to her grandmother. Estella, a reserved and eccentric woman, had always kept a certain distance from the family. Megan mostly knew her from sporadic childhood visits, but after a while, the visits stopped altogether. The only thing Megan really remembered was Estella's obsession with her vast collection of dolls. When Estella died, Megan was surprised to learn she was the sole heir. She hadn't expected to inherit the old house, filled with strange, antique things. Even though the family connection was distant, Megan decided to travel to the countryside and prepare the house for sale. The plan was simple: spend a few days there, organize everything, and get rid of the dolls that filled every corner. Upon arriving at the house, the silence was suffocating. The old structure was in good condition, but it felt as though time had frozen inside. The windows were tall, covered by heavy curtains that filtered sunlight into warm golden tones, while the smell of aged wood hung in the air. Megan climbed the stairs slowly, her eyes wandering over the dolls on the shelves and chairs, their empty glass eyes watching her. Some were large, almost the size of small children, dressed in vintage clothing. Others, delicate miniatures with eerily lifelike details. There was something unsettling about them, but Megan dismissed it as nothing more than the odd nature of antique dolls. When she reached her grandmother's bedroom, the collection was even denser. Estella had clearly devoted much of her time to caring for the dolls, sewing intricate clothes and meticulously cleaning them. Megan noticed that in every corner of the room, a different doll sat, each with a peculiar expression, as though guarding old, forgotten secrets. Curiosity got the better of her, and Megan walked over to a closet in the corner of the room. Inside was the last doll Estella had acquired, sitting alone on a shelf. It was larger than the others, dressed in a pristine white silk gown, with black hair neatly styled and eyes that seemed to follow every movement. Something about the doll made Megan shudder, but she picked it up anyway, placing it with the rest in the room. She began packing things away, but as she worked, she couldn't shake the eerie feeling of being watched. The silence in the house felt heavier, and the temperature seemed to drop slightly. Megan tried to ignore the growing unease, but the dolls seemed closer, as if they had moved when she wasn't looking. That night, Megan decided to sleep in her grandmother's bedroom. It was an impulsive decision, almost as though she wanted to challenge herself not to be intimidated by the sinister collection. However, sleep didn't come easily. The room felt colder than the rest of the house, and the dolls on the shelves sat there, unmoving, their eyes fixed on her. The shadows cast by the dim light of the lamp made their faces appear more alive, as if they were on the verge of movement. Suddenly, a soft, whispering sound filled the room. Megan sat up in bed, her heart racing. She glanced around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but no one was there. She felt foolish for being scared of old dolls, but just as she was about to lie back down, a faint movement caught her eye. One of the larger dolls had fallen to the floor, its white dress sprawled as if it had been pushed. Hesitantly, Megan got up and picked up the doll. As she placed it back on the shelf, she noticed something she hadn't seen before: a small inscription on the back of the doll's neck, almost imperceptible. Upon closer inspection, it read, "Annie, 1934. What did that mean? Was it just an old date, or something more? Over the next few days, the incidents became more frequent. The dolls continued to move on their own, falling or appearing in different places. One night, as she absent-mindedly stared at the doll in the white dress, its eyes seemed to shift in color. Frightened, she backed away, and at that exact moment, she heard a low, sinister laugh. There was no longer any denying that something was very wrong. Determined to uncover more about the collection, Megan began sifting through her grandmother's things. Among old documents, she found a diary. In it, Estella described not only her life, but also a side of her grandmother Megan could never have imagined. Estella had been a deeply disturbed woman with a dark past that no one in the family knew about. The diary revealed a terrible secret. Estella had been a killer. Over the decades, Estella had murdered several people, mostly children and young adults who had mysteriously disappeared from the small town. She lured them in with her charm, offering them comfort or a false sense of security. Megan felt a chill run down her spine with every word she read. But the worst was yet to come. Estella hadn't just killed them. According to the diary, she had performed dark rituals on each of her victims. She captured their souls and trapped them inside the dolls in her collection. Each doll contained the corrupted essence of someone she had murdered. Megan was paralyzed as the horrifying truth sank in. The dolls in the house weren't just lifeless objects. They were prisoners, tortured souls seeking revenge. And now, they were tired of waiting. That night, Megan was woken by a terrible sound, like something being dragged across the floor. When she opened her eyes, she saw that all the dolls were gathered around the bed, forming a circle, their eyes glowing with a fury that seemed to burn from within them. Before she could react, a sharp pain shot through her arms and legs. The dolls were moving, grabbing at her with their small, rigid hands. She tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat, suffocated by fear. One doll in particular, the one in the white dress, began crawling closer, dragging itself across the floor, its once expressionless face now filled with malevolence. Then, a whispering voice echoed through the room. "She trapped us? Now you'll pay for it." The dolls moved more aggressively, pulling Megan down to the floor. Their fragile bodies, once just porcelain objects, were now instruments of vengeance. Megan felt sharp pain as they scratched at her, their tiny, claw-like fingers tearing at her skin. Desperate, she tried to escape, but every move she made was met with resistance from the circle of dolls. The house was alive with a dark, malevolent energy, fueled by decades of pain and anger. The dolls weren't just trying to scare her, they wanted revenge.